Good morning, everybody. More church vandalism outside Winnipeg. CTV News is reporting, quote, "It's a catastrophe. Statue outside Winnipeg church beheaded." Beheaded? Weird. A Winnipeg community is left searching for answers after a statue outside of the church was destroyed early Tuesday morning. "It's a catastrophe to say the least," said the Right Reverend Michael Boychuk. Sorry if I've got that wrong. Boychuk? Sorry if I've got it wrong. The vandalized sculpture, which sits outside the cathedral at St. Vladimir and Olga on McGregor Street, is of St. Vladimir, I think. Sorry if I got that wrong. During the incident, both the head and a cross were removed from the monument. Winnipeg police say they were notified about the incident around 1:50 p.m. on Tuesday, but believe it occurred around 4:30 a.m. that morning. "It's sad, to have somebody come and do such vandalism without any rhyme or reason," said Boychuk. The statue, created by sculptor Leo Moll, was blessed by Pope John Paul II in 1984. Boychuk said the church hopes the head is being sold for scrap metal so it can be retrieved and fixed. Otherwise, they'll have to find another artist to fix it. There's very good people in this cathedral, and to have this done to them, it's just a painful experience, he said. Please ask anyone with information to contact them or Crime Stoppers. Unbelievable, right? In the rash of church vandalism and desecration, to say that, we don't know why they're doing this. I mean, who knows? But my goodness, a pattern is a pattern, and speaking to the pattern is important. Elizabeth May is taking herself out of serious contention for any real position of power, like opposition or balance of power or prime minister, by tweeting this, quote, "To be very clear, we do not support a single additional barrel of output, a single additional well, or offshore exploration, no fracking, a rapid transition off fossil fuels. Please join us." And she's responding to herself tweeting, "Please read #Mission Possible. We commit to meet or exceed all demands in the Pact for GND. We commit to just transition, UNDRIP, all 17 SDG goals. Hitting 60% cuts by 2030, 0 by 2050 is our goal. Join us to get there. GPC, #GPC Mission Possible." Yeah, I mean, that was a difficult tweet to read, really, with all the acronyms and stuff, right? But if you want to be a politician in Canada, oil is a necessary thing to talk about, and it's one of our biggest revenues, and you can't run Canada the way Canada has been run without selling oil. So what's your plan, Miss May? What's your comprehensive plan? I don't see it. Okay, David Millard Haskell is saying the Libs are paying $600 million to bribe the media. Who gets a piece will be decided by 2 unions, 6 industry insider groups, 0 reps from independent media. But it will lead to creativity. Reporters will toil to craft fresh stories on why everything left is best. They are already doing that. Here's the Post-Millennial reporting on this story. Trudeau asks unions and lobbyists to spend $600 million on media bailout. The Trudeau government has released a list of organizations that will sit on a special advisory panel tasked with spending $600 million earmarked for media bailouts. The organizations are News Media Canada, the Association de la Presse Francophone, the Quebec Community Newspaper Association, the National Ethnic Press and Media Council of Canada, the Canadian Association of Journalists, the Fédération Professionnelle des Journalistes de Québec, Unifor, Mr. Diaz, yeah, and the Fédération Nationale de Communication. Sorry if I've got any of those things wrong. Andrew Coyne pointed out in a prophetic November 2018 article in the National Post that this bailout will, quote, "irrevocably politicize the press." Broken down, there are 8 organizations in total on the advisory panel. 2 are unions, 6 are industry insider groups, 4 are francophone. There is 0 representation of independent media. How exactly is this an independent panel if there's no independent representation? Yeah, this is Mr. Diaz and his union, right? Yeah, Unifor, right? Very, very nonpartisan, arm's length, certainly. Ha, what a joke. And back to the article, it says, as we've said before, the Trudeau government is in no position to declare which newspapers and websites are considered reliable. The fact that the entire panel is made of media insiders and unions confirms that this assertion was correct. In fact, this special advisory panel is an insult to independent journalists and all Canadians. Yeah, and it's not just them thinking that either. Here's the National Post reporting, quote, reporting Liberals' media bailout put foxes in charge of the henhouse. It is difficult to know where to begin to deplore the process by which the federal government will decide which media organizations to subsidize and which not to. So let's start with Unifor's involvement. Unifor, you may ask? The flamboyantly anti-conservative labor union? Indeed, the mega union representing 315,000 workers across the country, including a large percentage of Anglophone Canadian journalists at legacy media outlets and also auto workers, because that totally makes sense, will nominate one of 8 people to an, quote, independent panel of experts. The panel will decide the criteria for divvying up tax breaks, adding up to some $600 million in public funding. It is questionable of the government to ask any journalists' union to weigh in on this. The Fédération Nationale de Communication, FNC, which counts many francophone journalists among its members, also gets a vote. After all, the idea here is supposed to be to help media organizations adapt to new market conditions, and these unions represent people who have every interest in riding dying business models to retirement. But Unifor is the union that turned nakedly partisan during the 2015 election campaign. Fundingled-filled attack ads against Stephen Harper's Conservatives and mortifying many journalist members whose credibility depends on their perceived political independence. More recently, Unifor's executives have collectively styled themselves, quote, Andrew Scheer's worst nightmare, eliciting more futile pleas from journalists to shut up. Well, those were the days. Now the government that benefited from Unifor's partisan largesse has asked for it to help deciding who's a proper journalist and who's a proper news outlet and thus worthy of government largesse. If Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez had explicitly set out to bolster the notion that Canadian media are bought and paid for by the Liberal Party of Canada, he could have done no better. Scroll down a bit. The CAJ opposed the idea, arguing correctly that dividing journalists into classes backed by legislation and giving one group rights and privileges denied to the other is a fundamental interference by the government in true freedom of the press. I scroll down again. Other groups, including the FNC, sometimes lack even the most basic qualms. In 2016, quote, brief regarding the future of regional news submitted to the Federal Heritage Committee, not the Feritage Committee, it recommended not just that government distribute giant wads of cash to struggling media outlets, but also that it, quote, strengthen the regulation of the media and their responsibility to inform. These people now have a seat at the table deciding how to distribute government money, ostensibly in the name of strengthening press freedoms. The mind boggles. Back in the day, credentialism and preferential government advertising rules struck people like me as terrible incentives for journalists and their employers to stay in the government's good books, and serious risks to the independence and perception thereof. How young and naive we were. Now the Liberals literally want to cut media organization checks, and people claiming to act in journalists and journalism's best interests are climbing all over each other, not just to be first in line, but to decide who goes home empty-handed. It's a nightmare, and Rodriguez seems to have found the worst conceivable way to make it come true. If the Liberals want to help the media, they should use the blowback as an opportunity to ditch the whole idea. I agree. Here's a Friends of Science thing responding to Catherine McKenna, and they say, you said, we were elected by Canadians from coast to coast to coast who expect us to stand up, who expect us to make decisions based on science. So here's the science. No hashtag climate emergency. And it's an interesting video. It's worth a watch. A link to the tweet will be in the description. I'm not going to watch the video, but I did watch the video this morning, and it's worth it. It's worth the, I think it's 6 minutes. I watched it at double time, so it was like 3.5 minutes, but it's worth it. They go over a couple of the controversies, a couple of the things. And the fundamental thing here is there's been so much taxpayer waste. There's been so much hair on fire reporting. Everything's very, very politically charged. If you don't do something, we're all going to die. And it seems way, way overblown, especially in light of the evidence. You know, they try and inflate all this stuff to make it seem very dire and try and shout people down who say, hold on a second, there's a whole lot of signs that maybe throwing money at this isn't going to change the trajectory of what's happening. Simple, right? Throwing money at this isn't going to fix this problem. Having temper tantrums on the House of Commons floor or on Twitter isn't going to solve the problem either. So, anyway. Crackdown on money laundering does not include federal public inquiry. So I've been reporting on money laundering. There's 2 more stories today. Money laundering and Philippine garbage. International incident. Yes. But first, I've been reporting on this money laundering thing. And I've been saying that they're going to try to vilify the people doing the work. So if you walk into a real estate office and you want to buy $1 million house and you have $750,000 in a hockey bag, Well, now, or not now, but after we read this article here, you'll understand Mr. Blair is saying that the real estate agent has a responsibility to say no. But the problem is fundamentally, and I'm going to show you in the next article I show you, that the laws in Canada are weak. So even if the real estate agent does his job and says, this guy's probably money laundering, number one, he's going to tick off a customer. Number two, he's going to lose the sale. Number three, he is not going, this customer who's trying to money launder, possibly, maybe, allegedly, with a bag of money, like with a hockey bag full of money, right? Still allegedly, is still going to launder that money. He's going to get away with it. And I'll show you why in just a minute. Well, here's the why, right? Crown mistakenly exposes police informant killing massive BC money laundering probe. And I'll show you here. Like, it was believed, this is from the article, it was believed to be the largest money laundering probe in Canadian history and a crucial prosecution for BC that sources say has failed because of weakness in Canadian law enforcement, including the inadvertent disclosure of information that could have endangered a hidden informant cooperating to help the RCMP break the case. So they were working on this. This was a really important case. Like, federal other cases depend on the precedent this case was supposed to set, and it fell apart. So even if the real estate agent does follow through and the police come in and get the guy with the hockey bag and they say, you're money laundering, he says, no, I'm not, I'm going to get my lawyer, and then everything happens and everything gets set to go to trial, and it's going to fall apart because the laws are weak in Canada, because they're made purposely weak because the federal government isn't moving to do anything to change them. Right? And regardless of what Mr. Blair is saying, what Mr. Blair is saying is they're going to start trying to get frontline people to start telling the police when this is happening, and they're not doing that enough, and that's why this is a problem. That's not why this is a problem. Here's the National Post, quote, the federal minister in charge of Canada's fight against money laundering supports British Columbia's public inquiry into dirty money, but says a national examination is not necessary. Organized crime reduction minister, what a ridiculous name, Bill Blair, said Tuesday, money laundering is occurring across Canada and internationally, but the federal government has already started implementing measures to combat illegal money. From my perspective, we've already identified some very significant things that need to be done, he said. It's been ongoing work, these types of measures. I think will send a very clear message that Canada is cracking down. Blair said the most recent federal budget included extra anti-money laundering spending for the RCMP, Canada's Financial Intelligence Unit, the Financial Transactions and Report Analysis Centre for Canada, and the creation of a task force to identify threats and loopholes. The Canada Revenue Agency received funding to create 4 new residential and commercial real estate teams to hunt for money laundering in the property sector, he said. The government is also amending current anti-money laundering laws to better track who owns property and monitor property sales. Quote, we need to have better understanding of who owns which corporations and who has money in there, said Blair. If someone comes in with a hockey bag full of cash, you can't just pretend you're indifferent and don't know its origins. You have a responsibility of due diligence. For those who are reckless, there could be criminal consequences. But the author of a recent C.D. Howe Institute report on money laundering says Canada is behind the times when it comes to fighting the crime. Kevin Comeau's report, Why We Fail to Catch Money Launderers 99.9% of the Time, said Canada's anti-money laundering policies are among the weakest of Western democracies, and billions are laundered in Canada annually. I've looked at this as well. That's a quick aside. There's lots of videos I've done about money laundering in the last year, and it's really, really bad and inflating our real estate market across the country. It's incredible. Okay, back to the article. The whole idea of anti-money laundering is to shine as much light on it as possible so you can have other people viewing say, aha, that's the bad guy, says Comeau. Anything less than a public registry is saying we don't want to bring it up to best standards. British Columbia's government introduced legislation last month aimed at preventing tax evasion and money laundering by looking to identify anonymous property owners through a registry that will be public in 2020. An independent report commissioned by the BC government concluded that $7.4 billion was laundered in BC last year out of an estimated total of $47 billion across Canada. The report by former BC Deputy Attorney General Maureen Maloney said money laundering contributed to 5% increase in real estate values in the Metro Vancouver area in 2018. Incredible, right? Really crazy. And here's the money laundering thing I was going to show you. And the last story for the morning, the last one for not about for today, but we'll see, is Philippines rejects Canada's late June timeline for garbage repatriation. And I said yesterday, it's a shame that our government is so ineffective and so inefficient that Mr. Duarte was forced to saber rattle and now send these ships because our government can't figure it out. And is this the government's problem? Not necessarily. But it is now. It is now. When you've got the president of another country saying, like, this has been here for 6 years, nobody's done anything. The government hasn't talked to the company to say, get this done or fixed. The government hasn't, There are diplomatic ways to fix this problem. You pick up the phone, you talk to the original company, you say, do you have connections here? Get the garbage moved, or we're going to fine you and then get the garbage moved, right? Like, there's a way to do this, and not a way to, like, running around like a chicken with your head cut off, like the Trudeau government does with pretty much everything. Remember that time he said, Jody Wilson-Raybould remains in my cabinet, and that speaks volumes, and then she quit? Yeah, it's like that, right? Like, everything's fine because I haven't looked at anything, and everything's fine because nobody's told me that that something's broken, and nobody's telling him that something's broken, because I'm sure he would have a temper tantrum if they did. According to Miss Cesar Chavanez, that's exactly what happened when she said, hey, this is a problem. Yelled at her, and then apologized, and then yelled at her again. Crazy. So that's our prime minister. That's our ineffective government. This is an international incident that should have been avoided. Come on, diplomacy is part of the job, guys, right? Come on, we shouldn't be getting an international incident with the Philippines. Wow. In an election year, 5 months before the election. Whew. Incredible. Okay, that's enough for me. Check out the peoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. I'm going to try and get another one in before the end of the day today. We'll see, though. We'll see. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.